Hello, everybody. Give me a second. Let me get my voice back. See that, y'all? All right. Hello, 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 hello. Day number 3 of improving myself. Basically, improve my brain functions. I feel there's a huge problem with the media we consume and all consume media, and I don't know. That's been something that's been on my mind for a while, and surprisingly, YouTube knows it. And I'm seeing more and more of those videos. Well, I like it. I'm doing this again. Damn, stain this. Products of coincidence, fraud, or subtle similarities in the family environment, such as adaptation agencies striving to place identical twins in homes that both encourage walking into the ocean backwards. The findings, of course, can be misinterpreted in many ways, such as by imagining a gene for leaving little love notes around the house, or by by concluding that people are unaffected by the experiences. And because this research can measure only the ways in which people differ, it says little about the design of the mind that all normal people share. But by showing how many ways the mind can vary in its innate structure, their discoveries open our eyes to how much structure the mind must have. Reverse engineering the psyche. The complex structure of the mind is the subject of this book. Complex structure of the mind is the subject of this book. It's The complex structure of the mind is the subject of this book. Its key idea can be captured in a sentence. The mind is a system of organs of computations designed by natural selection to solve the kind of problems our ancestors faced in their foraging ways of life. In particular, understanding the outmaneuvering objects, animals, plants, and other people. The summary can be unpacked into several claims. The mind is what the brain does. Specifically, the brain processes information, and thinking is a kind of computation. The mind is organized into modules of mental organs, each with a specialized design that makes it an expert in one area of interaction with the world. I mean, yeah. The module's basic logic. The module basic logic is specified by our genetic program. The operation was shaped by natural selection to solve the problem of hunting and gathering. Life led by our ancestors in most of our evolutionary history. It's life led by our ancestors in most of our evolutionary history. The various problems for our ancestors were subtasks of one big problem for their genes. Like, the various problems for our ancestors were a subtask of one big problem for their genes, maximizing the numbers of copies that's made it into their next generation. On this view, psychology is engineering in reverse. In forward engineering, one designs a machine to do something. In reverse engineering, one figures out what a machine was designed to do. Reverse engineering is what the boffins at Sony do when a new product is announced by Panasonic boffins, or vice versa. They buy one, bring it back to the lab, take a screwdriver to it, and try to figure out what all the parts are for and how they combine to make the device work. We all engage in reverse engineering when we face an interesting new gadget. In rummaging through, in rummaging through an antique store, we may find ourselves a contraption that is instructive, that is instructable until we figure out what it was designed to do. When we realize that it is an olive pita, when we realize that it is an olive pita, we suddenly understand that the metal ring is designed to hold the olives and the lever lower an X-shaped blade through one end pushes the pits through the other end, and the shape and arrangements of the spring hinges, blades, lever and ring all make sense in a satisfying rush of insights. We even understand why canned olives have an egg-shaped incision at one end. In the 17th century, William Harvey discovered that veins had values and deduced that the values must be there to make the blood circulate. Since then, we have understood the body as a wonderful, complex machine, an assembly of struts, ties, springs, pulleys, levers, joints, hinges, sockets, tanks, pipes, valves, uh, sheaths, pumps, exchangers, and filters. Even today, we can be delighted to learn that we can be delighted to learn what mysterious parts are for. Even today, we can be delighted to learn what mysterious parts are for. Why do we have our wrinkled asymmetric ears? Because they filter sound because they filter sound waves coming from different directions in different ways. The nuance of the sound shadow tells the brain whether the source of the sound is above or below, in front or behind us. The strategy of reverse engineering the body has continued in the last half of this century as we have explored the nanotech of the cells and of the molecules of life. The stuff of life turned out to be not a quivering, glowing, wondrous gel, but a contraption of tiny jigs, springs, hinges, rods, sheath, magnets, zippers, and trapdoors assembled by a data tape whose information is copied, downloaded, and scanned. The rationale for reverse engineering living things comes, of course, from Charles Darwin. He showed how organs of extreme perfections and complication, which justly excite our admiration, arise not from God's foresight, but from the evolution of replicators over immense spans of time. As replicators replicate, random copying errors sometimes crop up, and those that happen to enhance the survival and reproduction rate of the replicator tend to accumulate over the generation. Plants and animals are replicators, and their complicated machinery thus appears to have been engineered to allow them to survive and reproduce. Darwin insisted that his theory explained not just the complexity of an animal's body, but the complexity of its mind. Psychology will be based on a few foundations. He famously predicted at the end of the origin of species, but if the origin of species, but Darwin's prophecy has not yet been fulfilled. More than a century after he wrote those words, he studied. the study of the mind is still mostly Darwin's free, often defiantly so. It's still Darwin's. It's still Darwin free. The study of the mind is still mostly Darwin free, often defiantly so. Evolution is said to be irrelevant, sinful, or fits only for speculation over a beer at the end of the day. The allergy to evolution in the social and cognitive sense science has been, I think, a barrier to understanding. The mind is an exquisite organized system that accomplishes remarkable feats. No engineer can duplicate. No engineer can duplicate. How could the forces that shape that system and the purpose for which it was designed be irrelevant to understanding? Can be relevant to understanding it. Evolutionary thinking is indispensable, not in the form that many people think of. Dreaming up missing links or narrating stories about the stages of man, but in the form of careful reverse engineering. Without reverse engineering, we are like the singers in Tom Paxton's The Marvelous Toy, reminiscing about a childhood present. It went zip when it moved, and pop when it stopped, and where when it stood still. I never knew just what it was, and I guess I will never, and I guess I never will. Oh, okay, brain farts. They starting, they coming more. That's all okay though. Only in the past few years has Darwin challenge, which only in the past few years has Darwin's challenge been taken up by by a new approach, uh, christened evolutionary psychology by the anthropologist John Tobey and the psychologist Lita Cosmedis. Evolutionary psychology brings together two scientific revolutions. One is the cognitive revolution of the 1950s and 1960s, which explained the machines of do the emotions in terms of information and computation. The other is revolution in evolutionary biology of the 1960s and the 1970s, which explained the complex the complex adaptive design of living things in terms of selection among replicators. The two ideas make a powerful combination. Cognitive science helps us to understand how a mind is possible and what kind of mind we have. Mind is possible and what kind of mind we have. Evolutionary biology helps us to understand why we have the kind of mind we have. Evolutionary psychology of this book is, in one sense, a straightforward extension of biology, focusing on one organ, the mind of one species, Homo sapiens. But in another sense, it is a radical thesis that discusses the way issues about the mind have been framed for almost a century. The premise of this book are probably not what you think they are. Thinking is computation, I claim, but that does not mean that the computer is a good metaphor for the mind. The mind is a set of modules, but the modules are not encapsulated boxes or mm, circumscribed swatches on the surface of the brain. The organization of our mental modules comes from our genetic program, but that does not mean that there is a gene for every trait or that learning is less important than we used to think. The mind is an adaptation designed by natural selection. Adaptation designed by natural selection. But that does not mean that everything we think, feel, or do is biologically adaptive. We evolved from apes, but that does not mean we have the same minds as apes. And the ultimate goal of natural selection is to propagate genes, but that does not mean that the ultimate goal of people is to propagate genes. Let's see some, let me show you why not. To create. I'm not 100% sure what it means, but I mean, Google it. Breed specimen of animals by natural processes from the parent stock. So breed, okay, cultivate, generate, create. Okay, okay. From the context, human is it's beautiful. This book is about the brain, but I will not say much about neurons or hormones or neurotransmitters. That is because the mind is not the brain, but what the brain does, and not even everything it does. It's but what the brain does, and not even everything it does, such as metabolizing fats and giving off heat. The 1990s have been named a decade of the brain, but there will never be a decade of the pancreas. The brain's special status comes from a special thing the brain does, which makes us see, think, feel, choose, and act. That special thing is information processing or computation. Information and computation reside in pattern of data and in relation to logic that are independent of the physical medium and carries them. Uh, there's independence of the physical medium that carries them. When you telephone your mother in another city, the message stays the same as it goes from your lips to her ears, even as it physically changes its form. From vibrating air to electricity in a wire, to charges in silicon, to flickering light in a fiber optic cable, to electromagnetic waves, and then back again in reverse order. In a similar sense, the message stays the same. When she repeats it to your father at the end, it's when she repeats it to your father at the other end of the couch after it has changed its form. Inside her head, it's a cascade of neurons firing and chemicals diffusing across synapses. Likewise, a given program can run on computers made of vacuum tubes, electromagnetic switches, transmitters, integrated circuits, or well-trained pigeons, and it accomplishes the same thing for the same reason. What do I understand by that? In a similar sense, the message stays the same when she repeats it to your father at the end of the day, at the end of the couch, after it has changed its form inside her head into a cascade of neurons, siren, and chemicals diffusing. Likewise, a well-trained pigeon, it accomplishes the same thing for the same reason. Data and in relation of logic, that's independence of the physical medium that carries them. This insight first expressed by the mathematician Alan Turing, the computer scientist Alan Newell, Herbert Simon, and Marvin Minsky, and the philosopher Hilary Putnam and Jerry Fodor. Is now called the computational theory of the mind. It is one of the great ideas in intellectual history, for it solves one of the puzzles that up the mind body that make up the mind body problem. How to connect the ethereal world. How to connect the ethereal world. How to connect the ethereal world of meaning and intention, the stuff of our mental lives, with a physical hunk of matter like the brain. Why did Bill get on the bus? Because he wanted to visit his grandma and knew the bus would take him there. No other answer will do. If he hated the sight of his grandmother, or if he knew the routes had changed, his body would not be on the bus. For millennia, uh, this has been a paradox. Paradox. Entities like wanting to visit one's grandma and knowing the bus goes to grandma's house are colorless, odorless, and tasteless. But at the same time, they are causes of physical events as potent as any billiard ball clanking into another. We have those thoughts. The computational theory of the mind resolves the paradox. It says that beliefs and desires are information incarnated as configuration of symbols. The symbols are the physical states of bits of matter, like chips in a computer or neurons in the brain. They symbolize things in the world because they are triggered by those things via our sense organ. Those things via the sense organ. Because of what they do once they are triggered. If the bits of matter that constitute a symbol are arranged to bump into the bits of matter constituting another symbol in just the right way, the symbol corresponding to one's belief can give rise to new symbols corresponding to another belief logically related to it, which can give rise to symbols corresponding to other beliefs, and so on. Well, I'll take that again. The symbols are physical states or bits of matter, like chips in the computer or neurons in the brain. They symbolize things in the world because they are triggered by those things via a sense organ. Because of what they do once they are triggered, if the bits of matter constitute a symbol, that if the bits of matter that constitute a symbol are arranged to bump into the bits of matter constituting another symbol just the right way. The symbol corresponding to one's belief can give rise to new symbols corresponding to another belief logically related to it. Get from this, if you believe you already have a foundation of one thing, if another belief, another idea comes in from somewhere else and it has corresponding values with what you already believe, to be easier for you to integrate those beliefs into yours. Eventually, the bits of matter constituting a symbol bumps into bits of matter connected to the muscles, and the behavior happens. The computational theory of mind thus allows us to keep beliefs and desires in our explanations of behavior while planting them squarely in the physical universe. It allows meaning to cause and be caused. The computational theory of the mind is indispensable in addressing the question we long to answer. Neuroscientists like to point out that all parts of the cerebral cortex look pretty much alike. Not only the different parts of the human brain, but the brain of different animals. One could draw the conclusion that all mental activities in all animals is the same. But a better conclusion is that we cannot simply look at a patch of brain and read out the logic and the intricate pattern of connectivity that makes each part do its separate thing. In the same way that all books are physically just different combinations of the same 75 or so characters, and all movies are physically just different patterns of charges along the track of a videotape, the mammoth tangle of spaghetti of the brain may look like it's the mammoth tangle. Hey, the mammoth tangle of the spaghetti. Hey, the mammoth tangle of spaghetti of the brain may all look alike when examined strand by strand. The content of a book or a movie lies in the patterns of ink, lies in the pattern lies in the pattern of ink marks or magnetic charges, and it's apparent only when the pieces and it's apparent only when the piece is read or seen. Similarly, the content of brain activities lies in the pattern. Similarly, the content of the brain activity lies in the pattern of connections and pattern of activities among neurons. Minute difference in the detail of the connections may cause similar looking brain patches to implement very different programs. Only when the program is run does the coherence become evident. As Toby and Cosmet have written, uh, Cosmides, Toby and Cosmides, I don't say two, it's like two O's. They are birds that migrate by the stars, bats that echolate, bees that compute variants of flower patches, spiders that spin webs, humans that speak, ants that farm, lions that hunt in teams, cheetahs that hunt alone, mongooses, no, 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 cheetahs that hunt alone, monogamous gibbons, monogamous monogamous gibbons, polyandrous seahorses, uh, polygynous gorillas. There are millions of animal species on Earth, each with a different set of cognitive program. The same basic neural tissue embodies all of these programs, and it could support others as well. Facts about the properties of neurons, neurotransmitters, and cellular uh, sorry neurotransmitters and cellular development cannot tell you which of these millions of programs the human mind contains, even if all neural activities in the expression of a uniform process, even if all neuron activities in the expression of a uniform process at the cellular level, it is the arrangement of neurons into bird songs, templates, or web spinning programs that matters. That does not imply, of course, that the brain is irrelevant to understanding the mind. Programs are assemblies of simple information processing units. Programs are assemblies of simple information processing units, tiny circuits that can match a pattern, turn to some other circuit, or do other elementary logical mathematical operations. What those microcircuits can do depends only on what they are made of. Circuits made from neurons cannot do exactly the same thing circuits made from silicon, and vice versa. For example, a silicon circuit is faster than a neural circuit, but a neural circuit can match a larger pattern than a silicon one. These differences ripple up through the program built from the circuits and affect how quickly and easily the programs do various things, even if they do not determine exactly which things they do. My point is that the prodding brain tissues is irrelevant to understanding the mind, only that it is not enough. Prodding brain tissues is irrelevant to understanding the mind, only that it is not enough. Psychology, the analysis of mental software, will have a burrow, will have to burrow a considerable way into the mountain before meeting the neurobiologist tunneling through from the other side. Burrow a considerable way through the mountain. Burrow, burrow. Bro was from bro, bro. A computational theory of the mind is not the same thing as the despised computer metaphor. As many critics have pointed out, computers are serial, doing one thing at a time. Brains are parallel, doing millions of things at once. Computers are fast, brains are slow. Computer parts are reliable, brain parts are noisy. Computers have a limited number of connections, brain have trillions. Computers are assembled according to a blueprint. Brains must assemble themselves. Yes, the computers come in potty colored boxes and and have auto sx.bat files mm, and run screensavers with flying toasters and brains do not. The claim is not that the brain is like commercially available computers. Rather, the claim is that the brain and computers embody intelligence for some of the same reason. To explain how birds fly, we invoke principles of lift and drag and fluid mechanisms that also explain how airplanes fly. That does not commit us to an aeroplane metaphor for birds, complete with jet engines and complementary beverage services. Without the computational theories, it is impossible to make sense of evolution of the mind. Most intellectuals think that human minds must somehow, most intellectuals, most intellectuals think that the human mind must somehow have escaped the evolutionary process. Evolution they think can fabricate only stupid instincts and fixed action patterns, a sex drive, an aggressive urge, a territorial imperative, hens sitting on eggs, and ducklings following hawks. Human behavior is too subtle and flexible to be a product of evolution. They think it must come from somewhere else, from say culture. But if evolution equipped us not with irresistible urges and rigid reflexes, but with a neural computer, everything changes. A program is an intricate recipe of logic and statistical operations directed by comparison, tests, branches, loops, and subroutine embedded in subroutines. Artificial computer programs from the Macintosh user, from the Macintosh user interface to simulations of the weather to program. It's, Artificial computer programs from the Macintosh user interface to simulations of the weather to programs that recognize speech and answer questions in English. Give us a hint of the finest and powerful. Let's give us the hints of the finesses and power of which computation is capable of. Human thoughts and behavior, no matter how subtle and flexible, could be the product of a very complicated program. And that program may have been our endowment. And that program may have been our endowment from natural selection. The typical imperative from biology is not thou shalt, but if then else. The mind, I claim, is not a single organ, but a system of organs which can think of a psychological faculty or mental module. The entities now commonly evoked to explain the mind, such as general intelligence, a capacity to form culture, and multipurpose learning strategies, will surely go the way of protoplas, proto. It will surely go the way of proto some in biology and of earth, and of earth, air, fire, and water in physics. These entities are so formless compared to the exacting phenomena they are meant to explain, that they must be granted near magical powers. When the phenomena are put under the microscope, we discover that the complex texture of everyday world is supported not by a single substance, but by many layers of elaborate machinery. Biologists long ago replaced the concept of an all-powerful protosome, 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 all-powerful protosome with the concepts of functionally specialized machines, functionally specialized mechanisms. The organ system of the body do their job because each is built with a particular structure tailored to the task. The heart circulates the blood because it is built like a pump. The lungs oxygenate the blood because they are built like gas exchangers. The lungs cannot pump blood and the heart cannot oxygenate it. This specialization goes all the way down. Heart tissues differs from lung tissues. Heart cells differs from lung cells, and many of the molecules making up heart cells differ from those making up lung cells. If that were not true, our organs would not work. A jack of all trade is master is a jack of all trade is master of none, and that is just as true for our mental organs as physical organs. Physical organs. The robot challenge The robot challenge makes that clear. Building a robot poses many software engineering problems, and different tricks are necessary to solve them. Take our first problem, the sense of sight. A seeing machine must solve a problem called inverse optics. Ordinary optics is the branch of physical that Ordinary optics is the branch of physics that allows one to predict how an object with a certain shape, material, and illumination projects the mosaic of colors called a retinal image. Optics is a well understood subject put to use in drawing, photography, television, engineering, and more recently, computer graphics and visual reality. But the brain must solve the opposite problem. The input is the retinal image, and the output is a specification of the objects in the world and what they are made of. That is what we know. What we see. Sorry, that is what we know, what we are seeing, and there's the rub. And there's the rub. Inverse optics is what engineers call an ill-purpose problem. An ill-purpose problem. Inverse optics is what engineers call an ill-purpose problem. It literally has no solution, just that it is easy to multiply some numbers and announce the product, but impossible to take a product and announce the numbers. There's no solution, just as it's easy to multiply some numbers and announce the product, but it's impossible to take a product and announce the numbers that we multiply to get it. Optics is easy, but inverse optics impossible. But inverse optics impossible. Yet your brain does it every time you open the refrigerator and pull out a jar. How can this be? How can this be? The answer is that the brain supplies the missing information about the world we evolved in and how it reflects light. If the visual brain assumes that it is living in a certain kind of world, an evenly lit world made mostly of rigid parts with smooth uniformly colored surfaces, it can make good guesses about what is out there, As we saw earlier, it's impossible to distinguish coal from snow by examining the brightness of their retinal projection, but say there is a module for perceiving the properties of surfaces, and built into it is the following assumption: the world is smoothly and uniformly lit. The module can solve the cold versus snow problem in 3 steps. Subtract out any gradients of brightness from one edge of the scene to the other. Estimate the average level of brightness, the whole scene, and estimate the average level of brightness of the whole scene, and calculate the shade of gray of which patch of subtracting its brightness from the average brightness. Calculate the patch and calculates each patch by subtracting its brightness from the average light, the average brightness, subtracting the brightness from the average brightness. Large positive deviations from the average are then seen as white things. Large negative deviations as black things. If the illumination really is smooth and uniform, these perceptions will register at the surface of the world accurately. Since planet Earth has more or less met the even illumination assumptions for eons, natural selection would have done well by building the assumption in. The surface perception module solves an unsolvable problem, but at a price. The brain has given up any pretense of being a general problem solver. It has been equipped with a gadget that perceives the nature of surfaces in typical earthly viewing conditions because it is specialized for that parochial problem. Parochial problem. Change the problem slightly, and the brain no longer solves it. Say we place a person in a world that is not blanketed with sunshine, but illuminated by a cunningly arranged patchwork of light. If the surface perception module assumes that illumination is light, if the let me just read that again. Say we place a person in a world that is not blanketed with sunshine but illuminated by a cunningly arranged patchwork of light. If the surface perception module assumes that illumination is even, it should be seduced into hallucinating objects that aren't there. Could that really happen? Hmm, this is the lighting. It happens every day. We call these hallucinations slide shows and movies and television, complete with the illusory black I mentioned earlier. Wait, the illusory black I mentioned earlier. When we watch TV, we stare at a shimmering piece of glass, but our surface perception module tells the rest of our brain that we are seeing real people and places. The module has been unmasked. The module has been unmasked. It does not apprehend the nature of things, but rely on a cheat sheet. That cheat sheet is so deeply embedded in the operation of our visual brain that we cannot erase the assumptions written on it. Even in a lifelong couch potato, the visual system never learns that television is a pane of glowing phosphor dots, and the person never loses the illusion that there is a world behind the panel, behind the pan, the pane. Our other mental module need their own cheat sheet to solve their unsolvable problems. Is a physicist who wants to figure out how the body moves when muscles are contracted, has to solve problems in uh, kinematics, the geometry of motion, and dynamics, the effects of forces. But a brain that has to figure out how to contract muscles to get the body to move It's a brain that has to figure out how to contract muscles to get the body to move, has to solve problems in inverse kinematics and inverse dynamics. What forces to apply to an object to get it to move in a certain trajectory, like inverse optics, kinematics, hmm, inverse optics, inverse kinematics, and dynamics, ill purpose problems. Our motor module solves them by making external but reasonable assumptions, not assumptions about illumination, of course, but assumptions about body's emotions. A common sense about other people is a kind of intuitive psychology. We try to infer people's belief and desires from what they do or they try to infer people's beliefs and desires from what they do and try to predict what they will do from our guesses about their beliefs and desires. Our intuitive psychology, though, must make the assumptions that people have beliefs and desires. We cannot sense a belief or desire in another person's head the way we smell organs. If we did not see the social world through the lens of that assumptions, we would be like the Samaritan eye robot, the Samaritan one robot, which sacrificed itself for a bag of lima beans, or like Samaritan two, which went overboard for any objects with a human-like head. Or Samaritan two, which went for any object with a human-like head. Even if the head belonged to a large wound-up toy, later we shall see the people suffering from a certain syndrome, lack their assumption that people have minds and do treat other people as wound-up toys. Even our feelings of love for our family members embody a specific assumption about the laws of the natural world. In this case, an inverse of the ordinary laws of genetic. Family feelings are designed to help our genes replicate themselves, but we cannot see or smell genes. Scientists use forward genetics to deduce how genes get distributed among organisms. For example, meiosis, the sex cause of offsprings of two people to have 50% of their genes in common. Our emotions about kin uses a kind of inverse genetics to guess which of the organisms we interact with are likely to share our genes. For example, if someone appears to have the same parents as you do, treat the person as if their genetics will begin. Sorry, treat the person as if their genetics well-being overlap with yours. I will return to all these topics in later chapters. The mind has to be built out of specialized parts because it has to solve specialized problems. Only an angel could be a general problem solver. We mortals have to make uh, fallible guesses from fragmentary information. Each of our mental modules solve its unsolvable problem by a leap of faith about how the world works by making assumptions that are indispensable but indefensible. The only defense being that the assumptions worked enough in the world of our ancestors. The word module brings to mind detachable, snapping contents. Sorry. The word module brings to mind the detachable, snapping components, and that is misleading. Components that is misleading. Mental modules are not likely to be visible to the naked eyes as circumscribed territories on the surface of the brain, like the flank stick and the rump roast on the supermarket cow display. A mental module probably looks like roadkill, sprawling measly over the bulges and crevices of the brain, or it may be broken into regions that are interconnected by fibers that make the region and make the region act as a unit. The beauty of information processing is that flexibility of its demand for real estate, just as a corporation management can be scattered across sites. Just as the corporation's management can be scattered across sites, linked by a telecommunication network or a computer program can be fragmented into different parts of disk or memory. The secretary underline the secretary underlining a psychological module might be distributed across the brain in a spatial haphazard manner. And mental modules need not to be tightly sealed off from one another. Communications only through a few narrow pipelines. What- Communicating only through a few narrow pipelines. Okay, mental module needs to be tightly sealed off from one another, communicating only through a few narrow pipelines. That is a specialized sense of module that many cognitive scientists have debated following a definition by Jerry Fodder. Modules are defined by the special things they do with the information about with the information available to them, not necessarily by the kinds of information they have available. So the metaphor of the mental module is a bit clumsy. A better one is Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky. Mental organ. An organ of the body is a specialized structure tailored to carry out a particular function, but our organs do not come in a bag like chicken giblets. They are integrated into a complex whole. The body is composed of systems divided into organs assembled from tissues built out of cells. Some kind of tissues like the epithelium, kind of tissue like epithelium are used with modifications in many organs. Some organs like the spread, some organs like the blood and the skin interact with the rest of the body across a wide, some organs like the blood and the skin interact with the rest of the body across a widespread convoluted interface and cannot be encircled by a dotted line. Sometimes it is unclear where one's organs leave off and another begins, or how big a chunk of the body we want to call an organ. How big a chunk of the body we want to call an organ. Is the hand an organ, the finger, a bone in the fingers? These are all pedantic questions of terminology and anatomist, the psychologist, right? And anatomist, and the psychologist have not wasted their time on them. Anatomists and the psychologists have not wasted their time on them. What is clear is that the body is not made of sperm, but has a heterogeneous structure of many specialized parts. All this is likely to be true of the mind, whether or not we establish exact boundaries for the components of the mind. It is clear that it is not made of mental sperm, but has a heterogeneous structure of many specialized parts. Heterogeneous structure of many specialized parts. Our physical brain owes their complex design to the information in the human genome, and so I believe do our mental organs. We do not learn to have a pancreas, and we do not learn to have a visual system. Language acquisition, common sense, or feeling of love, friendship, and fairness. No single discovery proves the claim. Just as a single discovery proves that the pancreas is innately structured, but many lines of evidence converge on it. The one that most impresses me is the robot challenge. Sorry, is the robot challenge. Each of the major engineering problems solved by the mind is unsolvable without built-in assumptions about the laws. Without built-in assumptions about the laws that hold it that hold in that area of interactions with the world. All of the programs designed by artificial intelligence researchers have been specifically engineered for a particular domain, such as language vision, movements, or one of many different kinds of common sense. Within artificial intelligence research, the proud parents of programs will sometimes taunt it as a merry demo of an amazingly powerful general purpose system to be built in the future. But everyone else in the field routinely writes off such hype. I predict that no one will ever build a human-like robot, and I mean a really human-like robot, unless they pack into sorry, unless they pack it with computational system tailored to differentiate problems. Throughout the book, we will run into other lines of evidence that our mental organs owe their basic design to our genetic programs. I have already mentioned that much of the fine structures of our personalities and intelligence is shared by identical twins, reared apart and hence chartered by their genes. Infants and young children, when tested with ingenious methods, show a precocious grasp of the fundamental categories of the physical and social world, and sometimes command information that was never presented to them. People hold many beliefs that are at odds with their experiences. Well, sorry, people hold many beliefs that are at odds with their experience, but we are true in the environments in which we evolved, and they pursue goals and that subverts them. Sorry, and they pursue goals that subverts their own well-being, but we're adaptive in the environment. And contrary to the widespread belief that cultures can vary arbitrarily and without limits, surveys of the ethnographic literature shows that the people of the world share astonishingly pronunciations. My pronunciations have my pronunciations astonishingly. Oh, what's the cause of this? Astonishingly. Many beliefs that are odds with their experiences, but we are true to the environment in which we evolved, and they pursue goals that subvert their own well-being, but we are adaptive in that environment. And contrary to the widespread belief that cultures can vary arbitrarily and without limits, surveys of the ethnographic literature shows that the people of the world share an astonishingly detailed universal psychology. But if the mind has a complex innate structure, that does not mean that learning is unimportant. Farming the issue farming the issue in such a way that innate structures and learning are pitted against each other, either as alternatives or almost as bad as complementary ingredients or interacting forces, is a colossal mistake. It's not that the claim that there is an interaction between innate structures and learning, or sorry, uh, between heredity and environment, nature and nurture, biology and culture, is literally wrong. Sorry. And learning is literally wrong. Is literally wrong. It's not that the claim that there is an interaction between innate structure and learning is literally wrong. Rather, it falls into the category of ideas that are so bad they are not even wrong. Imagine the following dialogue. It falls into the category of ideas that are so bad that are not even wrong. Imagine the following dialogue. This new computer is brimming with sophisticated technology. It has a 50 megahertz processor, a gigabyte of RAM, a terabyte of disk storage, and a 3D color visual reality display. Speech outputs, wireless access to the World Wide Web, expertise. It's expertise in a dozen subjects and built-in editions of the Bible, the Encyclopedia Britannia, Britannica, Bartlett's famous quotations, and the complete work of Shakespeare. Tens of thousands of hacker hours went into its design. Oh, so I guess you're saying that it doesn't. Sorry. Oh, I guess. Oh, so I guess you're saying that it doesn't matter what I type into the computer. Oh, I guess you're saying that it doesn't matter what I type into the computer. With all that built-in structure, its environment can be very important. It will always be the same thing regardless of what I type in. The response is senseless. The response is patently senseless. Having a lot of built-in machinery, having a lot of built-in machinery should make a system respond more intelligently and flexibly to its inputs, not less. Yet the reply captures how centuries of commentators, sorry, yet the reply captures how centuries of commentators have reacted to the idea of a richly structured high-tech mind and the interact mm, and the interactionist position with a phobia of ever specifying the innate part of the interaction is not much better. Look at these claims. Much better. Look at this claim. The behavior of a computer comes from a complex interaction between the processor and the inputs. When trying to understand how a car understands, sorry, how, fuck, when trying to understand how a car works, one cannot neglect the engine or the gasoline or the driver. All are important factors. The sound coming out of this CD player represents the inextricable, inextricably, in, sorry, inextricably represents the inextricably intertwined mixture of two crucial variables: the structure of the machine and the disk you insert into it. Neither can be ignored. The structure of the machine and the disk you insert into it, neither can be ignored. Inextricably, 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 extricably, inextricably. That is impossible to go separate inextricably. Inextricably. These statements are true but useless. So blanketly uncomprehendable. So defiantly incurious that it is almost as bad to assert them as to deny them. For minds, just as for machines, the metaphor of mixtures of two ingredients like a martini or a bottle between matched forces, like a tug of war and wrong-headed, sorry, like a tug of war are wrong-headed ways of thinking about a complex device designed to process information. Yes, every part of human intelligence involves culture and learning, but learning is not a surrounding gas or force field. and it does not happen by magic. It is made possible by innate machinery designed to do the learning. Innate machinery designed to do the learning. The claim that there are several innate modules is a claim that there are several innate learning machines, each of which learns according to a particular logic. To understand learning, we need new ways of thinking to replace the pers- pre-scientific metaphors, the mixtures and forces, the writing on slates and sculpting of blocks of marbles. We need ideas that capture the way a complex device can tune itself to unpredictable aspects of the world and take in the kind of data it needs to function. The idea that heredity and environment interact, it's not always meaningful. The idea that heredity and environment interact is not always meaningless, but I think it confuses two issues: what all minds have in common and how minds can differ. Heredity, and environment interact is not always meaningless, but I think it confuses two issues: what all minds have in common and how minds can differ. The vapid statements about the vapid statement above can be made intelligible by replacing how X works and with what makes X work better than Y. X works and what makes X work better than Y, what makes X. The usefulness of a computer depends on both the power of its processor and the expertise of the user. The speed of a car depends on the engine, fuel, and the skill of the driver. All are important factors. The quality of sound coming from a CD player depends on two crucial variables: the player's mechanical and technical design and the quality of the original recording. Neither can be ignored. When we are interested in how much better our system functions than a similar one, it is reasonable to gloss over the causal chains inside each system and tally up the factors that make them whole, that make the whole thing fast or slow. Sorry. And tally up the factors that make the whole thing fast or slow. Hi-fi or lo-fi hi-fi or lo-fi and this ranking of people to determine who enters medical school or who gets the job is where the framing of nature versus nurture comes from. When we are interested in when we are interested in how much better one system functions than a similar one, it is reasonable to gloss over the crucial chains inside each system and tally up the factors that make the whole thing fast or slow, hi-fi or lo-fi, and this ranking of people to determine who enters medical school or who gets jobs is where the framing of nature versus nurture comes from. And we're interested in how much better one system functions. Let's see. Fast or slow. Interested in how much better. Possibility judgment inside each system entirely of factors that make the whole thing fast. Yes, ranking people. This book is about how the mind works, not about why some people's. But this book is about how the mind works, not about why some people's mind might work a bit better in certain ways than other people's minds. The evidence suggests that humans everywhere on the planet see, talk, and think about objects and people in the same basic way. The difference between Einstein and a high school dropout is trivial compared to the difference between the high school dropout and the best robot in existence, or between the high school dropouts and the chimpanzee. That is the mystery. I want to address this. That's the mystery I want to address. Nothing could be further away from my subject matter than a comparison between the means of overlapping bell curves from some crude customer index like IQ. And for this reason, the relative importance of innateness and learning is a phony issue. An emphasis on innate design should not, by the way, be confused with the search for a gene for. An emphasis on innate design should not be the way, should not, by the way, be confused with the search for a gene for. This is the mental organ. This, this or that mental organ. Search for a gene for this or that mental organ. Oh, okay, search for gene for that this or that thing. Search for gene for this or that mental organ. Think of the gene and the putative genes that have made the headlines. Genes for muscle dystrophy. Sorry, genes for muscular dystrophy. Uh, Huntington disease, Alzheimer's, alcoholism, schizophrenia, manic depressive disorder, obesity, violent outbursts, dyslexia, bedwetting, and some kind of retardation. They are disorders, all of them. There have been no discoveries of a gene for civility, language, memory, motor control, intelligence, or other complex or other complete mental systems, and there probably won't be ever. The reason we summed up the reason was summed up by the politician Sam Rayburn. Any jackass can kick down a barn, but it takes a carpenter to build one. And jackass can kick down a barn, but it takes a carpenter to build one. Complex mental organs, like complex physical organs, surely are built by complex genetic recipes with many genes cooperating in as yet unfathomable ways. In as yet unfathomable ways. Many genes cooperating in as yet unfathomable ways. A defect in any of them could corrupt the whole device. A defect in any of them could corrupt the whole device, just as a defect in any part of a complicated machine, like a loose distributor cable in a car, can bring the machine to a halt. The genetic assembly instructions for a mental organ do not specify every connection in the brain, as if they were a wiring schematic for a heatkit radio. Assembly instructions for a mental organ do not specify every connection in the brain as if they were a wiring schematic for a heatkit radio. And we should not expect each organ to grow under a particular bone of the skull, regardless of what else happens in the brain. Emotional explain. The brain and all the other organs differentiates in embryonic development from a ball of identical cells. Every part of the body, from the toenail to the cerebral cortex, takes on its particular shape and substances. Takes on its particular shape and substances when its cells respond to some kind of information in their neighborhood that unlocks a different part of the genetic program. The information may come from the taste of the chemical soup that a cell finds itself in, from the shape of the of the molecular locks for sorry, for the shape of the molecule Sorry, for the shapes of the molecular locks and keys that the cell engages from mechanical tugs and shoves from neighboring cells. Other cues still poorly understand. Sorry, other cues still poorly understood their families of neurons that will form the different mental organs or descendants of the homogeneous stretch of embryonic tissue must be designed to be the opportunistic must be designed to be opportunistic as the brain assembles itself, seizing any available information to differentiate from one another. The coordinates in the skull may be one trigger for differentiation, but the pattern of inputs firing from connected neurons is another. Since the brain is destined to be an organ of computation, it would be surprising if the genomes did not exploit the capacity of neural tissue to process information during brain assembly. In the sensory area of the brain, where we can best keep track of what's going on, we know that early in fetal development, neurons are wired according to a rough genetic recipe. Neurons are wired according to a raw genetic recipe. The neurons are born in an appropriate number at the right times, migrate to their resting place, send out connections to their targets, and hook up to appropriate cells and to appropriate cell types in the right general region, all under the guidance of chemical traits and molecular locks and keys to make precise connections through the baby neurons. So, through the baby neurons must begin to function. So, though the baby neurons must begin to function to make precise connections though the baby neurons need though the baby neurons must begin to function and their firing partners carries information downstreams about their pinpoint connections. This isn't experience as it's all can take place in the pitch black womb. It all can take place in the pitch black womb, sometimes before the rods and cones are functioning, and many mammals can see almost perfectly as soon as they are born. Eso no, eso no, then, not to as onto the journey. This is the journey. It's more like a kind of genetic data compression or a set of internally generated test patterns. These patterns can trigger the cortex at the receiving end to differentiate at least one step of the way into the kind of cortex that is appropriate to process the incoming information. For example, in animals that have been cross-wired so that their eyes are connected to the auditory brain, that area shows a few hints of the properties of the visual brain. How the genes control brain development is still unknown, but a reasonable summary of what we know so far is that the brain modules assume the identities by a combination of what kind of tissues they start out with. They start out as where they are in the brain, and what pattern of triggering inputs they get during critical periods in development. Open inputs they get during critical periods in development. Organs or computations are a product of natural selection. The biologist Richard Darwin called natural selection the blind watchmaker. In the case of the mind, we can call it the blind programmer. Our mental programs work as well as they do because they were shaped by selection. Sorry, because they were shaped by selection to allow our ancestors to master rocks, tools, plants, animals, and each other on um, and each other ultimately in the service of survival and reproduction. Natural selection is not the only cause of evolutionary change. Organisms also change over the eons because of the statistical accidents in who lives and who dies. Environmental catastrophes that wipe out whole families or creatures, and the unavoidable byproducts of changes that are the products of selection. But natural selection is the only evolutionary force that acts like an engineer, designing organs that accomplish improbable but adaptive outputs. Accomplish improbable but adaptive outputs, a point that has been made forcefully by the biologist George Williams and by Darwin. The textbook arguments for natural selection, accepted even by those who feel that selection has been overrated, such as the paleo, paleon- such as the paleontologists, such as the paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould, comes from the vertebrate eyes. Sorry, has been overrated. Comes from the vertebrate eye. Just as a watch has too many finely meshing parts, gears, springs, pivots, and so on, to have been to have been assembled by a tornado or a river eddy, entailing inside the design of a watchmaker. The eyes has too many finely meshing parts, lens, iris, retina, and so on, to have arisen from a random evolutionary force like a big mutation, statistical drift, or fortuitous, the fortuitous, or the fortuitous shape of the nooks and the crannies between other organs. The design of the eye must be a product of must be a product of fortuitous, fortuitous. Fortuitous, happening by accident or by chance rather than design. Fortuitous, 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 fortuitous shape of the nooks and crannies between other organs. The design of the eye must be a product of natural selection or replicators. The only non-miraculous natural process we know sorry, the only non-miraculous natural selection of replicators, the only non-miraculous natural process we know of that can manufacture well-functioning machines. The organisms appear as if it was designed to see well now because it owns its existence to the success of its ancestors in seeing well in the past. These points will be explained in chapter 3. Many people acknowledge the natural selection in the artifice. Sorry, many people acknowledge that natural selection is the artificer of the body, is that the artificer of the body, but it draws the line when it comes to the human mind. The mind, they say, is a byproduct of a mutation that's enlarged the head, or is a clumsy programmer's hack, or was given its shape by cultural rather than biological evolution. Toby and Cosmides points out a delicious irony. The eye that's most uncontroversially explains, sorry, the eye that's most uncontroversial, controversial, uncontroversial. Sorry, the eye that's uncontroversial. The eye, that most uncontroversial example of fine engineering by natural selection, is not just any old organ that can be sequestered. Sorry, it's not just any old organ that can be sequestered with flesh and bone, far away from the land of the mental. It doesn't digest food or expects in the case of Superman. It doesn't digest food or expect in the case of Superman. Change anything in the physical world. What does the eye do? The eye is an organ of information processing firmly connected to, autonomically speaking, a part of the brain. And all those delicate optics and intricate circuits in the retina do not dump information into a yawning, empty orifice or span. Some Cartesian charms from a physical to a mental realm. The receiver of this richly structured message must be every bit as well engineered as the sender. As we have seen in comparing human vision and robot vision, the parts of the mind that allow us to see are indeed well engineered, and there is no reason to think that the quality of engineering progressively deteriorates as the information flows upstream to the faculties and acts on what we see. The adaptationist program, okay, I got it right. The adaptationist program in biology, or the careful use of natural selection to reverse engineer the parts of an organism, is sometimes ridiculed as an empty exercise in after the fact storyline. In the satire of the syndicated columnist, in the satire of the syndicated columnist Cecil Adams, the reason our hair is brown is that it's enabled our monkey ancestors to hide amongst the coconuts. Admittedly, there is no shortage of bad evolutionary explanation. Why do men avoid asking for directions? Because our male ancestors might have been killed if they approach a stranger. What process do music serve? It brings the community together. Why did happiness evolve? Because happy people are pleasant to be around, so they attracted more allies. What is the function of humor? To relieve tension. Why do people overestimate their chances of surviving an illness? Because it helps them operate effectively in life. These musing strikes us as glib and lame, but it's not because they dare to seek an evolutionary explanation of some parts of the mind how some parts of the mind work. Is because they botch the job. First, many of them never bother to establish the facts. Has anyone ever documented that women like to ask for directions? Has anyone ever documented that women like to ask for directions? Would a woman in a foraging sorry in a woman would a woman in a foraging society not have come to when she approached a stranger? Second, even if the facts had been established, and stories try to explain one puzzling fact by taking for granted some other facts that is just as much of a puzzle, getting us getting us nowhere. Why do rhyth- rhythmic why do rhythmic noises bring a community together? Why do people like to be with happy people? Why does humor relieve tension? The author of these explanations treats some part of our mental life as so obvious. They are, after all, obvious to each of us here inside our heads, that they don't need to be explained. Sorry, they are so obvious here inside our head that they do not, they don't need to be explained. But all parts of the mind are up for grabs. Every interaction, every pleasure, every taste. When we try to explain how it evolved, we could have evolved like a Samaritan one robot, sorry, could have evolved like the Samaritan, one robot, which sacrificed itself to save a sack of lima beans, or like dung beetles, which must find dung delicious, or like the masochist in the odd joke about sadomasochist, masochist, it means sadist. No, a good adaptationist explanation needs to be fulcrum, or it needs to be the fulcrum of an engineering analysis. Be the brunt, needs to be the head, be the base foundation. Needs to be the fulcrum of an engineering analysis that is independent of the parts of the mind we are trying to explain. The point. Be the central. Main point. Points of a lever. Supporting points of a lever. Fulcrum of an engineering analysis that is independent of the part of the mind we are trying to explain. The analysis begins with a goal to be attained and a world of causes that's effects of and a world of causes and effects in which to attain it, and goes on a specific what kind of design are better suited to attain it than others. Unfortunately, for those who think that a department in a university reflects meaningful divisions of knowledge, it means that psychologists have to look outside psychology if they want to explain what the part of the mind are for. To understand sight, we have to look to optics and computer vision systems. To understand movement, we have to look to robotics. To understand sexual and familial feelings, we have to look to Mendelian genetics, Mendelian, Mendelian genetics. What is Mendelian? Mendelian relating to mystery of heredity. Is inheritance is a type of biological inter, is a type of biological inheritance following the principle originally proposed by George Meadow. What is it? Mendelian inheritance refers to a certain pattern of how traits are passed from parents to offspring. Yeah, Mendelian genetics. To understand cooperation and conflicts, we have to look to the mathematics of games and to economic modeling. Once we have a spec sheet for a well-designed mind, we can see whether Homo sapiens has that kind of mind. We can see whether Homo sapiens has that kind of mind. We do the experiments or surveys to get the facts down. Sorry, we do the experiments or surveys to get the facts down about a mental faculty, and then see whether the faculty meets the specs, whether it shows significance or precision, whether it shows significance, whether it shows signs of precision, complexity, efficiency, reliability, and specialization in solving its assigned problems, especially in comparison with the vast number of alternative designs that are biologically growable. The psychology of reverse engineering has guided researchers in a sorry, psychology of reverse engineering has guided researchers in a virtual perception for over a century, in a virtual obsession for over a century. And that may be why we understand vision better than we understand any part of the mind. There is no reason that reverse engineering, guided by evolutionary theory, should be bringing insights about the rest of the mind. Should not bring insight about the rest of the mind. An interesting example is a new theory of pregnancy sickness, traditionally called morning sickness by the biologist uh, Margie Prophets. Margie Prophets. Many pregnant women become nauseated and avoid certain foods, though their sickness is usually explained as a side effect of hormones. Though their sickness is usually explained as a side effect of hormones, there is no reason that hormones should induce nausea and food aversion rather than, say, hyperactivity, aggressiveness, or lust. The Freudian explanation is equally unsatisfying that pregnancy sickness represents the woman's loathing of her husband and her unconscious desire to abort a fetus orally. Prophets predicted that pregnancy sickness should confer some benefits that offer the costs of lower nutrition and productivity. Ordinarily, ordinarily, nausea is a protection against eating toxin. The poisonous food is ejected from the stomach before it can be much harm. And our appetite for similar food is reduced in the future. Perhaps pregnancy sickness protects women's Perhaps pregnancy sickness protests women against eating or digesting food with toxins that might harm the developing fetus. Your local Happy Carrots health food store, not with stabbing. Let me see. Your local Happy Carrots health food store, not with standing Notwithstanding, there is nothing particularly healthy about natural foods. Your cabbage, a Darwinian creature, has no more desire to be eaten than you do. Your cabbage, a Darwinian creature, has no more desire to be eaten than you do. And since it can't very well defend itself through behavior, it resorts to chemical warfare. Most plants have evolved dozens of toxins in their tissues, insecticides, insect repellents, irritants, parasites, poisons, and other sand to throw in herbivorous gears. Herbivores have in turn evolved countermeasures such as a liver to detoxify the poison and the taste sensation we call bitterness to deter any further desire to ingest them. But the usual defense may not be enough to protect a tiny embryo. So far, this may not sound much better than the barf up your baby. So far, this may not sound much better than barf up your baby theory, but Prophet synthesized hundreds of studies done independently of each other and of her hypothesis that supports another hypothesis that supports it. She meticulously documented that one plant toxin is in dosage that adults tolerate can cause birth defects and induce abortion when ingested by pregnant women. Two, pregnancy sickness being at the point when the embryo's organ systems are being laid down and the embryo is most vulnerable to birth defects, including chemicals, but is growing slowly and has only a modest need for nutrition. Pregnancy sickness one wins at the large sorry Pregnancy sickness wins at the stage when embryos organ systems are nearly complete as it digests and its digest needs sorry and its biggest needs is for nutrition to allow it to grow. Its biggest needs for nutrition to allow it to grow. That supports it meticulously documented one plant toxins in dosage that adults tolerate can cause birth defects and induce abortion when ingested by pregnant women. Pregnancy sickness begins at the point when the embryo organ system being laid down and the embryo is most vulnerable to teratogens, ter- teratogens, teratogens, birth defects inducing chemicals, but is growing slowly and has only a modest need for nutrition. Pregnancy sickness wanes at the stage when the embryo organ systems are nearly complete and its biggest need is for nutrition to allow it to grow. Women with pregnancy sickness selectively avoid bitter, pungent, highly flavored, and novel foods, which are in fact the ones most likely to contain toxins. Women's sense women's sense of smell becomes hypersensitive during the window of pregnancy sickness and less sensitive than usual thereafter. Foraging people, uh, including presumably our ancestors, are at even higher risk of ingesting plant toxins because they eat wild plants rather than domesticated crops bred for palatability. Seven, pregnancy sickness is universal across human culture. Eight, women with more severe pregnancy sickness are less likely to miscarriage. Nine, women with more severe pregnancy sickness are less likely to bear babies with birth defects. The fits between how a baby making system in a natural ecosystem ought to work and how the feeling of modern women do work is impressive and gives a measure of confidence that Prophet's hypothesis is correct. Prophet's hypothesis is correct. The human mind is a product of evolution, so our mental organs are either present in the mind of apes and perhaps other mammals and vertebrates, or arose from hauling the mind of apes, especially the common ancestors of humans and chimpanzees that lived about 6 million years ago in Africa. Many titles of books on human evolution uh, reminds us this fact. The naked ape, the electric ape, the scented ape, the lopsided ape, the aquatic ape, the thinking ape, the human ape, the ape that spoke, the third chimpanzee, the chosen primates. Some authors are militant that humans are barely different from chimpanzees and that any focus on specifically human talents arrogant, arrogant chauvinism, chauvinism, yeah, arrogant chauvinism, or tantamount to creationism. For some readers, that is a reduction, that is a reductio ad absurdum of the evolutionary framework. If the theory says that man at best is only a monkey shaped, as Gilbert and Sylvan put in the puts it in Princess Ida, then it fails to explain the obvious fact that men and monkeys have different minds. We are naked, lopsided apes that speak, but we also have minds that differ considerably from those of apes. The outsize of the outsized brain of sa- Homo sapiens any standard, is by any standard an extraordinary adaptation. It has allowed us to inhabit every ecosystem on Earth, reshape the planet, walk on the moon, and discover the secrets of the physical universe. Chimpanzees, for all their vaulted intelligence, a threatened species clinging to a few patches of the forest and living as they did millions of years ago. Our curiosity about this difference demands more than repeating that we know. Right. It's looking at release. Oh, that was 20 pages. We'll be taking a short break and we'll be back in like 30 minutes. Good job.